The wind howled through the junkyard, carrying the sharp scent of rust, oil, and rain. Evan pulled his hood tighter over his head and stepped over a broken hoverbike. It was just another scavenging night. Same as always, he needed spare parts, anything. He could sell before the week ended. His stomach was empty and credits were running low. Lightning cracked above, lighting up piles of old, forgotten tech, broken bots, busted chips. Torn wires, some pieces older than the war itself, Evan's. Boots crunched against the metal as he dug through a collapsed satellite dish. Then, he heard it, a sound faint, but clear. Not a machine, not a wind echo. A scream. His heart stopped. It sounded young, desperate, like someone in pain. He stood still for a moment, trying to hear it again. Nothing. Just wind. He shook his head, thinking maybe he imagined it, but then it came again, closer this time. Help. The voice whimpered, followed by a metallic clatter. Evan didn't think twice. He grabbed his flashlight and moved quickly, jumping over jagged panels and crawling under a rusted wing. The junkyard stretched for miles, but the sound was guiding him. He followed it to an old crate, partially hidden under a pile of shredded wiring and scrap. Something inside moved. Hello? Evan called out, keeping his voice low. No answer, just a soft breathing sound. Like a tiny animal, he knelt down and carefully pried the crate open with a crowbar. His breath caught. Inside was a small figure curled up, tight arms over her head. Trembling, she was a girl, maybe 10 or 12 by size, but clearly not human. Her skin had a soft lavender glow, covered in dirt, blood, and broken wiring. Long silvery hair stuck to her cheeks, and strange glowing marks ran down her arms. She looked up slowly, eyes wide and golden, terrified. Don't hurt me, she whispered, her voice cracking like glass. I won't, Evan said gently. Dropping the crowbar, he knelt lower, keeping his hands where she could see them. I'm not here to hurt you. I heard you scream. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. Her thin arms hugged her knees as if trying to disappear. Evan noticed her feet were bare and bleeding. Metal shards had cut deep into her skin. What's your name? He asked, voice soft. No answer. Are you alone? Still no answer. Suddenly, lights flickered in the sky. Security drones. They scanned the area at night to stop thieves. If they saw him helping an unregistered alien, they'd report him. And if she was from a restricted race, they might just take her away forever. He looked down at her, then at the lights getting closer. There wasn't time to ask questions. He quickly pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her. She flinched, but didn't fight back. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was, like she hadn't eaten in days. As he turned to run, she whispered something against his chest. Home, please. Those two words hit him like a punch to the chest. He didn't know who she was, what she was, or why she was here. But he knew one thing: someone had dumped her here to die, and he wasn't going to let that happen. Evan ran through the junkyard, dodging rusted towers and ducking under steel beams. The rain had started falling, cold and fast. He reached his repair shack at the edge of the yard and slammed the door shut behind him. He locked it, then gently placed the girl on a folded blanket near the heater. She didn't speak, just stared at him with glowing, frightened eyes. Evan grabbed a clean cloth and gently wiped the blood from her legs. She winced, but didn't cry. She'd already done all her crying, he realized. I don't know who you are, he said quietly, but you're safe now. She looked around. The tiny shack tools on the walls, half-built drones on the tables. A small picture of Earth in the corner, faded and torn. Her lips trembled, and she whispered, You. Not bad. No, Evan said, nodding. Not bad. She blinked slowly, then curled up on the blanket. Within minutes, she was asleep, shivering, but finally calm. Evan sat beside her, eyes fixed on the rain hitting the window. He didn't know what he had just gotten himself into, but something told him. This was only the beginning. The next morning, the shack was quiet. Evan sat near the table, sipping cold tea and staring at the small alien girl still asleep on the blanket. Her breathing was steady, her body wrapped tightly in his oversized jacket, but even in sleep, her fingers were clenched like she expected to be hurt again. He didn't even know her name, and yet, he felt responsible. She didn't belong out there in the cold. Among trash and forgotten machines, she was small, fragile, and clearly traumatized. But something about her eyes, those deep, glowing golden eyes, made it impossible for him to walk away. The heater buzzed gently in the corner, filling the room with warmth. After a while, she stirred, slowly opening her eyes. She sat up quickly and pressed herself against the wall, eyes darting around the room. "It's okay, Evan," said, holding up his hands. "You're safe. You're inside my home." Her eyes studied him carefully, not trusting a word. She looked at the tools on the wall, the half-repaired drones on the table. Then she looked down at herself, his jacket still wrapped around her, her feet cleaned and bandaged. Her voice came out low and raspy. "Why? Help." Evan sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I don't know. Maybe because no one else would." He reached to the side and pulled out a small packet of nutrient bars. He unwrapped one and held it out. She flinched, like she expected it to explode. "I'm not trying to poison you," he said with a small smile. "It's just food." Slowly, very slowly. She crawled forward and snatched it from his hand. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't run either. She ate like someone who hadn't tasted food in days, maybe longer. "What's your name?" Evan asked again, softly. She looked at him for a moment, then pointed to herself and whispered, "Sia." Evan nodded, repeating the name out loud. "Sia. That's a pretty name." She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to figure out if he was mocking her. "Your name?" she asked carefully. "Evan," he replied. "I fix things. Bots, ships, anything broken." Sia looked down at her glowing arms, covered in faint scars and lines that pulsed slowly with light. She whispered, "I'm broken too." Evan's heart twisted. "No," he said firmly, "you're not." She didn't respond. Instead, she crawled toward the corner. Still keeping a careful distance from him, her body was thin, far too thin. Her hands shook from cold or fear. She wrapped herself in the jacket again and curled into a ball. Evan didn't push her. He spent the rest of the morning quietly fixing a damaged drone, letting her watch if she wanted. Every time he moved too fast or made a loud noise, she flinched. She wasn't just afraid, she was trained to expect pain. Later that day, Evan connected his tablet to the galactic net and searched for any missing children reports. He found nothing that matched Sia's species. No registration, no alerts. No photos, like she didn't even exist, which made one thing clear. Someone didn't want her to be found that night. He made her a small bed from spare fabric and soft coils of insulation. She didn't say a word, but she did lie down on it. He noticed her eyes staying half open, as if she didn't dare sleep too deeply. Before turning off the lights, Evan asked gently, "Sia, what happened to you?" She didn't answer right away. Then, in a whisper so faint it was almost lost in the wind, she said, "They took kids. Many put in cages." Said, "We were not perfect." Evan froze. Cages. Imperfect. His blood boiled. He sat beside her bed, eyes soft but voice steady. "You're safe now. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you again." For a moment, she just stared at him. Then she whispered something that made his breath catch. "You lie too?" "No," Evan said, looking directly into her eyes. "I don't lie." She stared a few seconds longer, then finally laid her head down and closed her eyes. Evan stayed beside her until her breathing slowed and steadied. He wanted to believe. It was over that she'd heal and they could both move on. But deep down, he knew something darker was coming. Whatever group had dumped her in that junkyard. They wouldn't stop just because she was gone, and Sia. She was more than just a scared girl. There was something strange about her. Something powerful, and someone, somewhere, wanted her back. The wind outside the shack had quieted, but Evan's mind wasn't calm. He kept checking the scanner screen on the wall, watching for movement beyond the junkyard gates. Sia was asleep again, curled under his jacket, her soft breathing barely audible, but her skin still glowed faintly. The strange marks on her arms pulsed now and then, like something inside her was alive. Evan had seen many things while working in remote outposts across the galaxy, but never anything like this, and never anyone like her. Suddenly, the scanner beeped. A ship had landed nearby, too close to be a supply vessel. It wasn't registered either, which meant one thing: private, off the record, and dangerous. Evan's heart jumped. He looked out the side window and spotted. It's sleek, dark gray, and silent. No lights, no markings. Just hovering a few feet above the mud, 3 figures stepped out, tall and covered in dark cloaks. He couldn't see their faces, but something about their movements was wrong too. Still too smooth, he turned back to Sia, who now sat up straight on the bed. Staring at the door, her eyes wide, filled with pure fear. Her lips moved, and Evan leaned closer to hear her whisper. "They found me." Evan moved fast, pulling up the floor panel beneath the table, a crawl space for tools and spare batteries, but big enough for a child to hide in, he said firmly. "Don't speak, no matter what." Sia crawled in without protest, pulling the panel closed over herself. Evan threw a dirty blanket on top and grabbed a half-broken drone from the table. Just seconds later, there was a loud knock on the door. 3 short bangs, metallic and sharp. He opened the door slowly, trying not to show his shaking hands. The 3 figures stood in the rain, faces hidden by shadowed hoods. One stepped forward and spoke. "We detected unusual energy patterns in this sector." The voice was cold, mechanical, yet perfectly clear. "Have you seen anything strange?" Evan shrugged, pretending to be annoyed and tired. "Everything's strange around here," he said. "Old war tech, broken reactors, faulty scanners. Take your pick." The figure stepped closer. "Unauthorized life forms were tracked too. This region. You are the only inhabitant in this zone." Evan forced a laugh. "I wish I wasn't. I'd love a neighbor or two." He waved at the scrap around his shack. "Feel free to look around. But I promise you, there's nothing alive in this mess, except me and maybe a few rats." The second figure raised a small scanner and swept it across the shack. As it passed over the floor, the device began to blink red. Evan's breath caught but just then, every light in the shack flickered and sparked. The scanner short-circuited in the figure's hand with a crackling sound. The lights burst out and sparks flew from the control panels. All of it. Triggered by fear, Sia, hidden beneath the floor, was panicking. And her panic was affecting everything around her. The lead figure turned sharply. "This zone is unstable. We'll return with suppression gear." Then, almost as quickly as they had come, the 3 turned and walked away. Their cloaks flapped silently in the wind as they disappeared into the shadows. The ship lifted off without a sound and vanished into the sky. Evan didn't move for several seconds. His heart pounded. Sweat ran down his back despite the cold. Then, slowly, he pulled the blanket away and lifted the floor panel. Sia lay, curled tight, glowing softly, tears on her face. "They're not bounty hunters," she whispered. "They're collectors." Evan helped her out and sat her on the bed. "Collectors?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "They take children. Special ones. Some they sell. Some they keep." She looked up at him, her eyes full of pain. "I escaped. I shouldn't have. They want me back." Evan ran his hand down his face. "Everything." was spinning out of control, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a simple rescue anymore. She was being hunted, and now, so was he. He pulled up his data tablet and scanned the symbols glowing on Sia's arms. They weren't just markings, they were language ancient, complex, royal. After an hour of digging through old databases, he found it. The symbols matched. The extinct crest of the Valdari bloodline, a species wiped out nearly a century ago in a silent, brutal war. Rumors said the last heir had been lost in space, or captured, or killed. But now, Evan realized he was looking at her. Sia was the last of her kind, and someone powerful wanted to control her, or destroy her. He closed the tablet, sat beside her, and spoke gently. "You're not going back to them. You're safe now." Sia leaned her head against his arm and whispered, "Then I stay here, with you. This is home." Evan looked at the broken walls of his shack and the storm still raging outside. He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's home now for both of us." But deep down, he knew something bigger was coming. And next time, the collectors wouldn't leave so easily. The storm finally passed. But the silence it left behind felt heavier than thunder. Evan sat alone at the table, the glow from his tablet lighting up his tired face. Sia was asleep again, curled up on the floor with a heater buzzing softly beside her. Her arms, marked with glowing symbols, rested over her chest like armor. But those marks weren't just scars. They moved just slightly, shifting and flickering when she dreamed. He had seen strange tech in the past, implants, trackers, even living tattoos. But nothing like this. Sia was something else, and he needed to understand before it was too late. He tapped the tablet and reopened the ancient archive. A file from an old smuggler's database popped up, barely readable, but still intact. The symbols on Sia's arms matched the royal code of the Valdari, a species known for their deep energy bonds and unique genetic scripts written directly into their skin. Each child was born with these glowing patterns, tied to both their emotions and their heritage. But the Valdari were gone, destroyed in a silent extermination war decades ago. Most thought they were a myth now, but one girl remained. Evan looked at her again. Her face calm and sleep. She didn't look royal. She looked like a lost child who had survived something terrible. When morning came, Sia woke quietly. She didn't smile, but her eyes seemed calmer now. She sat at the small table with Evan and drank warm water slowly. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't spill. He waited until she finished before asking, "Do you know what those symbols on your arms mean?" Sia looked down at them, then back at him. She hesitated, then nodded. "Old words, names, my line, my people, your family." Evan asked. "Yes," she whispered. "My mother said. I carry all of them." He leaned forward. "Your mother, is she gone?" Sia said quickly, her voice flat. "She gave me to the stars to run." Evan didn't ask more. Her expression was enough. After breakfast, he showed her his tablet. He pulled up an old image from the Archiva, drawing of the Valdari crest. A swirling sun wrapped in starlight, nearly identical to the mark on her left shoulder. Sia stared at it for a long time, then gently placed her hand over her arm. "That was my father's crest," she whispered. "They marked me before the end." Evan felt the air shift around them like a soft vibration. Then the lights flickered again. Even though nothing was broken, Sia looked up in panic. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Evan said quickly. "You didn't do anything wrong." But inside, he knew her emotions were tied to her power, and her power was growing. He stepped toward the wall and uncovered an old training bot he had once used. For cargo handling practice, he powered it up and turned to her. "Want to try something?" She blinked, unsure. "Try what?" "I want you to focus your energy, that glow inside you, toward the bot." She looked scared. "I can't control it. I hurt things." "You didn't hurt me," Evan said gently. You saved us both when those collectors came. I believe you can control it. You just haven't been shown how." Sia stood slowly and took a deep breath. She faced the bot and closed her eyes. The glow from her arms brightened, flowing into her hands. Then it flickered fast and wild, sparking across the floor. The bot twitched, then shorted out completely with a loud pop. Sia gasped and stumbled back. "I ruined it." Evan smiled. "No, you disabled it. And that thing's survived blaster fire." "You did great." Sia looked surprised. No one had ever told her she did something right. "Not once." "You're not broken," Evan said again. Firmer, this time, "You were made for something special. But someone tried to use you for the wrong reasons." She nodded slowly, as if starting to believe it. Then her expression darkened. "They wanted to plug me into a machine. They called it the Awakening Core." She looked up at Evan. "They said I was the key. The others didn't survive the tests." Evan's blood ran cold. Whatever they wanted from Hurt wasn't for healing or peace. It was power, destruction. Maybe worse, he moved to the old radio station in the corner of the shack. The collectors would come again, and next time, they'd bring more than scanners. He needed to prepare. He opened the transmitter, added a booster coil, and began crafting. A new signal. A fake distress code from a military salvage unit. Something to scare off small ships. If they returned soon, they'd think he wasn't alone. Meanwhile, Sia sat quietly on the floor, drawing patterns in the dust with her finger. The same crest over and over again. As if trying to remember a home that no longer existed. That night, Evan gave her an old blanket, a real one-knot scrap fabric or insulation. She held it like a treasure, and before she slept, she whispered, "You remind me of my brother." Evan didn't reply. He simply sat near her and watched the stars. Through the tiny window, something was coming, and when it did, he wouldn't let her face it alone. Evan spent the next 2 days preparing. He didn't leave the shack, not even once. Outside, the wind had died down, but he knew the storm wasn't truly over. Not the one in the sky, the one in space. Hunting for Sia inside, his tools never stopped moving. Wires snaked across the walls. Traps were rigged into the floor. He even reactivated some of his old defense drones, programming them to respond only to his voice and hers if the collectors returned. They wouldn't find the same helpless shack they had walked through last time. Sia helped where she could. At first, she stayed in the corner and just watched. But slowly, she began handing him tools, studying his hands, and copying what he did. She never asked why they were building traps. She already knew. One afternoon, while they worked in silence, Evan glanced at her and said, "I think you're good at this." Sia looked up, surprised. "At what?" "At building, learning, fixing things," he said. "You're not just powerful. You're smart too." Her cheeks darkened. A sign he had learned meant she was embarrassed or maybe shy. "No one ever told me that," she said quietly. "Well," Evan replied, "they were wrong." That evening, they ate together beside the heater. Evan had opened a can of vegetable stew, barely food, but warm. Sia didn't speak much, but she stayed close, sitting right next to him instead of across the room. After dinner, she looked at him seriously and asked, "If they come again, will you leave me?" Evan didn't hesitate. "No," he said firmly. "I won't leave you." Sia stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. She believed him now. Even if her fear never truly left her, Evan's presence gave her something new, hope. The next day, the scanners blinked red again. 3 ships, approaching fast. No registration codes. They were back. Evan stood tall, heart pounding. He activated the signal jammers, armed the drones, and powered up the defense grid. Then he turned to Sia. "Go to the crawl space. Stay hidden. Only come out if I call you by name. Promise me." Sia hesitated, but nodded. Then, just before she climbed in, she turned and whispered, don't get hurt." Evan gave a small smile. "I'll be fine." They're the ones who should worry. The collectors landed without sound again. But this time, there were more of them, 6 figures in total. All armed, all covered in dark armor with strange symbols. Their helmets had glowing lenses, scanning the area rapidly. Their leader stepped forward taller. With silver plating down his chest, he looked around slowly, then shouted, "We know she's here." "You had your warning." Evan stepped out of the shack. A small control pad in his hand. He didn't say a word, just walked forward as if unafraid. "Where is the girl?" the leader demanded. Evan smirked. "You mean the one you threw in the junk like garbage?" He clicked the pad once. Boom! A blast erupted beneath one of the collector's boots, sending him flying into a pile of scrap. The others turned, weapons raised, but before they could shoot, 3 defense drones shot from the roof and began circling them. Sparks flew as they tried to fight back. But Evan had reprogrammed everything: lasers, shields, even gravity pulls. The collectors were caught in a storm of traps, but they weren't weak. One by one, they began disabling the drones with advanced shock weapons. Evan ducked behind an engine block as plasma scorched the air beside him. He activated another blast pad, causing a second explosion that sent a metal tower crashing down. But the leader remained untouched, walking through fire like a ghost. "You think traps will stop us?" he growled. "She is not a child. She is a device. A key," Evan shouted from behind cover. "She's not a thing. She's someone. And she's under my protection." The leader raised a hand and energy pulsed from it. Evan's defenses began shutting down one by one. The collector was using a jammer more powerful than anything Evan had seen. Inside the shack, Sia trembled. She could feel Evan's heart beat fast. Scared, she knew he was in danger. She couldn't just hide anymore. Her body began to glow brighter, her markings lighting up the walls. She placed her hand against the crawlspace door and whispered, "Please don't be mad." Then she opened it, stepped out, and walked into the chaos. The ground trembled as she passed. Scrap metal floated slightly in the air around her, like pulled by her aura. The collectors turned. "There she is," one of them said, eyes wide behind his mask. Evan saw her and yelled, "No, Sia, get back." But she didn't stop. She raised her hand, and the storm answered. A wave of blue-white energy blasted from her body. Not wild this time, focused. The shockwave knocked the invaders off their feet, their weapons overloaded, helmets cracked, armor plates shattered, and the leader? He staggered forward, arm raised, then dropped to his knees. Defeated, Evan ran to her, breathless. She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "I didn't want to wait. You said I wasn't alone." He pulled her into his arms. "You weren't." He whispered, "You never will be." The junkyard was on fire. Smoke rose in long black columns, and the sky above flickered with the last sparks of fading energy. Twisted metal lay everywhere, melted, scorched, and cracked. Some of the collector drones still twitched on the ground, sparks blinking out like dying stars. But in the center of the chaos stood Sia. Her bare feet rested on scorched earth, her glowing skin dimming slowly. She looked around as if waking from a dream or maybe a nightmare. Evan rushed to her side, dust and sweat streaking his face. "You okay?" he asked, voice shaking from panic and relief. Sia turned to him, eyes shining not with light, but with tears. "I didn't mean to go that far," she whispered. "I just didn't want them to take you too." Evan dropped to one knee, placing his hands on her shoulders. "You saved us. You saved both of us." He looked into her face, her cheeks covered in ash and tears, and added, "You controlled it, Sia. You didn't lose it?" She blinked as if she didn't believe him. Then something broke inside her, and she fell into his arms, shaking for a long moment. Neither of them spoke, just sat in the middle of burning wreckage and held each other. The Fires burned for hours. By sunset, the defense drones had shut down. And the traps had fried their cores. Evan sat by the heater again, holding an old cup of water. The shack was half broken, now one wall completely gone, the roof dented from the explosion. But inside, it was warm and safe. Sia sat on the floor. Wrapped in a blanket, her knees pulled up to her chest. She hadn't spoken much since the battle, but she hadn't let go of Evan's jacket either. She kept holding it, even as her hands shook. Evan knew trauma didn't fade overnight, but he also knew what healing looked like, and she was trying. Trying to believe she wasn't just a weapon or an experiment, trying to believe someone could care without needing something in return. That night, while the wind tapped softly against the window, Sia finally spoke again. "Why didn't you run?" Evan looked over from the table where he was fixing a cracked tool. "What do you mean? You could have left. When they came back, you could have let them take me." Her voice was so soft it nearly vanished. "Most people do that, Evan." Set the tool down and walked over to her, sitting beside her on the floor. "I don't leave the people I care about," he said. "You're not just a passenger or some problem I picked up in the junk. Your family now." Sia looked down at her glowing hands. "I don't know what family means anymore. It means this," he said, pointing to the ruined shack. The heater, the tools scattered everywhere. It means sitting through storms. Together, it means standing up when the other one's too tired to fight. It means staying. She was quiet again. Then she whispered. "Then this. Feels like home." She looked at him, eyes wide and unsure. "Are you home?" Evan swallowed, caught off guard by the question. Then he gave the smallest, warmest smile she had ever seen from him. "Yes," he said softly, "if you'll have me." Sia leaned her head against his arm and closed her eyes. "I already did." By morning, they started rebuilding, not just the shack, but everything. Evan pulled out spare parts from the deepest corners of the junkyard. Sia used her control over energy to lift heavier materials and even fix wiring from a distance. Together, they formed a new rhythm, like a family of two, surviving and growing piece by piece. Days passed, and then a week, and slowly, the junkyard began to transform. Not just piles of scrap anymore, but towers of metal turned into shelter. Sheets turned into walls. Light strips powered by solar cores that Sia charged herself. One evening, as the last bit of light dipped behind the horizon, Evan handed her a small item. It was a tiny piece of metal, shaped like a star, with a hole in the middle. "I found this near the broken collectors," he said. "Looks like it's part of your people's crest." Sia stared at it for a moment, then pressed it close to her chest. "I'll wear it. Always," she whispered, "because it came from you. And you are part of me now." Evan said nothing, but his chest tightened this time. Not from fear, but from something stronger. Deeper love. That night, as they watched the stars outside. "The new roof window," Sia whispered. "You know what I used to call home? A cell? A cold room. Nothing but glass walls." Evan looked at her, waiting. She smiled softly. "But now, it's this. Junk, fire, noise. And you?" She turned and added in a voice just barely trembling. "You're the first person I ever chose to stay with, Evan." Reached out and gently pulled the blanket tighter around her. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not ever." The sky was clear for the first time in weeks. No smoke, no clouds. No collector ships darkening the sun. Just the soft blue hue of a quiet morning. And in the middle of the junkyard, something new had grown. It wasn't a shack anymore, Evan. And Sia had rebuilt the shelter into a real home, metal walls polished clean. Solar panels stretched wide, antennas lined neatly like flowers in bloom. Lights glowed from the inside, soft and welcoming. The place looked alive. Evan stood on the roof, tightening the last bolt of a comms tower. Below him, Sia stood barefoot on the ground, her arms crossed and glowing faintly with warmth. She looked up and called, "You missed a bolt." Evan laughed. "Impossible." I double-checked. "Then triple-check," she teased. "You always say safety first." He grinned and gave a mock salute before climbing down. Sia handed him a canister of fresh coolant. Not long ago, she was afraid to even hold tools. Now, she helped repair complex systems like it was second nature. She had grown not in size, but in spirit. Inside the home, a new table stood between them, holding warm food. Sia's drawings hung on the walls strange. Stars, swirling symbols, and sometimes people. A woman with eyes like hers, a tall man with tools in his belt, and two smaller children holding hands, surrounded by light. Evan noticed the drawings, but never asked. He didn't need to. They were the family she lost. And the one she was slowly building again that evening, something unusual happened. The long-range receiver flickered to life. Evan jumped up from his chair and adjusted the dials. The signal was weak, but clear. Galactic Alliance Patrol. Responding to distress code, entering orbit for inspection. His heart skipped. He had sent out the fake code weeks ago to scare off the collectors. But now, real officials were on their way. Sia looked at him, unsure. "Do we run?" Evan shook his head. "No, not this time." He stepped outside and waved a long rod into the air, signaling their location within the hour. A white and gold patrol cruiser descended slowly into the junkyard. 4 uniformed officers stepped out, weapons lowered, but alert. One of them spoke. "We received a distress signal." This zone was marked as abandoned. Evan stood calmly, Sia just behind him. It wasn't abandoned. It was forgotten. Big difference. They scanned the area and quickly found the scorched wreckage of collector tech. Their expressions changed. "You fought them off." One asked, stunned. "I didn't." Evan said, stepping aside, "She did." The officers turned to see Sia step forward, her eyes glowing just slightly, for a moment. They reached for their weapons, but Evan raised a hand. "She's not a threat. She's a survivor." One of the officers scanned her, eyes widening as the royal markings came into focus. "This girl. She's Valdari," he whispered. "They were wiped out?" "Not all of them," Evan replied. "Some were just waiting to be found." The leader of the group stepped forward slowly. "There's a sanctuary station," he said, "for survivors of extinct lines. She would be safe there, guarded, protected." Sia looked at Evan, uncertain. Her fingers tightened around the edge of his sleeve. Evan crouched beside her. "It's your choice," he said. "You don't belong in cages anymore. You decide where home is." Sia stared at the stars for a long time. Then she shook her head. "I'm already home." The officer hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. But we will log her identity. She is under protection now. If they come again, we will come too." As the ship lifted off and vanished into the clouds, Evan looked at Sia and smiled. "You just told the entire galaxy you're not going anywhere." She smiled back. They needed to hear it. Weeks passed. Sia started keeping a journal. She used pictures, symbols, and simple words to describe her days. Woke up with light on face. Fixed the solar panel. Evan made food. Burned it again. Every page ended the same way. Still home. Sometimes they would walk to the edge of the junkyard and watch the skies. Other times they'd sit in silence, just existing. And sometimes Evan would tell her stories from Earth oceans, trees, snow. She would listen with wonder in her eyes and then ask if they could go there one day. Maybe, Evan would reply. But only if we bring all this with us. She laughed every time. All of this? Even the rusted pipes. Especially the rusted pipes, he'd say. They're part of us now. One night, Sia drew something new in her notebook. Not a memory, but a future. A ship not big, not fast, but strong. with a star painted on the front, inside it, 2 seats, and 2 small figures flying toward a sunrise. She showed it to Evan without a word. He looked at it for a long time, then nodded. "I think we'll need to start building that next." She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder softly. She whispered the words she once feared to say. "You're not just my rescuer, Evan. You're my forever." And beneath the stars, with nothing but scrap metal, quiet laughter, and shared silence, they began again, not just as survivors, but as family, as home.